Good evening, everyone. We'll go ahead and get started. Welcome to our webinar on funding the Frontlines. We're really happy that you've chosen to join us today for this really important and I'm sure very educational conversation. Just want to introduce myself. My name is Prarthana Gurung and I work on the Halt the Harm Network, and I'll be co-moderating today's session with Liz Butler from Stop the Frack Attack. Some really quick housekeeping guidelines for today just before we get started. Fear not, this webinar will be recorded and emailed to all registrants. I'm sorry, I just realized that I wasn't sharing my screen. Now we're back. Thanks for that. We have some tech people back on the back end who are helping me out with that. So again, today's webinar is going to be recorded and emailed to all registrants. Again, if you have any technical difficulties, clearly I just had some. We have Dani Arteaga, who you can chat in the bottom right-hand corner. You can also email her at info@halttheharm.net if you have any questions, and just send them your name and your contact info during the webinar, and we'll have someone get in touch with you to help you troubleshoot. And last but not least, we will have a really short survey at the end of the webinar to get any feedback you might have, and we'll make sure to share it with our team and everyone on the panel as well. So the webinar is just going to start off with some presentations from our panelists today, and will be followed by Q&A and an open discussion at the end. So again, just to help guide you through troubleshooting any issues, or if you want to ask a question, you'll see in the bottom right-hand corner there's a little chat function. And again, if you're having any technical difficulties, you can use the chat.
Hi folks, I guess while we're talking about technical difficulties, we've encountered a brief audio snag. This is Donna Arteaga speaking. If you hold the line for 1 minute, we'll fix this problem and we'll introduce the speakers. All right, well, while we're waiting for Prarthana to connect back into audio, Liz, would you mind introducing yourself?
Sure. Can you put it on the slide about Stop the Frack Attack?
Yes, absolutely.
Great. My name's Liz Butler, and I'm one of the folks that helped organize Stop the Frack Attack. We're a network of over 130 organizations across the country who are working on fracking. A number of our member groups are really on the front lines and are the frontline voices working to stop fracking in their communities. We also work with national groups who are working to fight fracking, and one of our intent is to really create better collaboration in the anti-fracking movement. And very specifically, we, in our first kind of coming together and envisioning that we did, we realized that there was a couple of things going on, is that a lot of communities were facing the impacts of fracking across the country, and that they needed to be lifted up and really given the tools and the skills to be able to impact fracking. The other thing that we needed to make sure happened was that they were really the leadership of the movement and were able to be in a situation where the national groups who are concerned about fracking were backing them up and working in collaboration with them. And so that's a lot of the work that we do. We do collaborative actions. So you'll see on the slides that there's 2 actions depicted there. One was our efforts in Paris around the climate talks, of really trying to make sure that we had frontline voices at the climate talks talking about the effects of fracking and its relationship with climate. The other is from just a couple weeks ago, where fracking activists, along with folks working to stop deportations, actually dropped a banner in Cleveland, really kind of signaling a very strong message that we wanted to make sure that the national leaders and people running for office got a clear message that people are standing up on fracking. We've also done strategy sessions and conferences and tackled collaborative joint campaigns that were intentionally about raising up the voices of the people that are in impacted communities on fracking across the country.
Wonderful, Liz. Thank you so much. Let's go ahead and hand it over to Stephanie. Stephanie, please go ahead.
Thank you to both Liz, Parthena, and Dawn, whose organizations are valuable resources to communities on the front lines of shale gas development. So my name is Stephanie Novak, and I'm the community organizer for Mountain Watershed Association and project coordinator of the Direct Support Fund. Mountain Watershed is home of the Youghiogheny Riverkeeper, and we're dedicated to protecting, preserving, and restoring the Indian Creek and Greater Yaak River watersheds. So we do this through both on-the-ground restoration and through our advocacy work on coal and shale gas extraction issues. So similar to Halt the Harm Network and Stop the Frack Attack, MWA has a network of community leaders that we coordinate with through our Marcellus Citizen Stewardship Project. And this work allows us to identify and advise frontline communities on how to respond to shale gas development, ultimately strengthening the grassroots efforts from the ground up. You can go to the next slide. Thank you. So why do the grassroots need funds? As fracking in PA continues, communities on the front lines are facing an onslaught of development in the form of well pads, pipelines, compressor stations, and processing facilities like the giant shell cracker plant in Beaver County. So the harms of fracking, they're well known and more are being documented every day. And the industry just continues to wreak havoc on the environment by contaminating our air and our water. Even though these impacts have negative effects on communities, we are still struggling to push back against the encroachment of the gas industry near people's homes and schools. To respond to the industry's invasion, frontline communities are launching grassroots campaigns across our state and the nation. And these campaigns, they come in many forms. It can be one individual working tirelessly to inform their neighbors. It could be a community group increasing public participation in local decision making, or an entire community in support of a ban. So regardless of the size or the strategy of the campaign, these individuals and groups need access to financial resources. Some of the current struggles for the grassroots include things like limited resources for individuals. So they're spending their own money or they're having to pass the hat. And if you're participating in this webinar, then you understand the emotional stress that's involved in doing this type of work. And you can move on to the next slide, please. So personal financial burdens ultimately end up leading higher rate of burnout among volunteers and activists in the anti-fracking movement. But there's also a barrier that exists between community groups and grant-making foundations. So groups pretty much only have the option to become a nonprofit or find a fiscal sponsor. And groups that choose to do that and become more formalized to increase their ability to create change basically have to teach themselves how to manage a nonprofit, which ultimately takes time away from the organizing and advocacy work that they are doing. So if they decide they want to become a nonprofit or find a fiscal sponsorship, there are still obstacles to overcome with either of those options. Both have a time and financial investment. You've got legal guidelines to follow, so things like taxes and licensing. And then there are also restrictions on activities that groups want to pursue. So if they want to take on a legal strategy or create change using like a ballot initiative or a referendum, there can be restrictions because of their funding sources. So MWA recognized the challenges that are faced by the grassroots to find these financial resources. So in August of 2014, we launched the Direct Support Fund. Now this project was made possible by the Heinz Endowments, the Chorus Foundation, the New England Grassroots Environmental Fund, and the 11th Hour Project. The goal of the fund is to support both individuals and groups working towards change on shale gas issues. Since August of 2014, the fund has provided more than $80,000, and that's generally in amounts less than $2,000 per project, for expenditures associated with activities like community organizing, education and outreach, science and research, and legal advocacy. And you can go to the next slide. We've got some additional information about direct support. So we hope that direct support will continue to serve as a model for other organizations who want to disperse foundation grant funds to the grassroots. There are similar funds out there, including Sierra Club's Pipeline Grant. Center for Health, Environment, and Justice has a small grants program. And I've also heard rumors that there are more grant programs like this to come. So next you're going to hear from 3 individuals from Frontline communities who successfully used direct support to overcome some of the financial barriers they've faced in their grassroots campaigns. You're going to hear next from Jillian Graber of Protect PT and the Protect Our Children Coalition.
Thank you, Stephanie.
Hey everyone, this is Prarsana. Sorry, Jillian, didn't mean to cut you off. The audio definitely failed on my end, but I'm back and Jillian can go ahead and take the lead.
Okay, thanks, Prarsana. I'm Jillian Graber, and Protect PT, meaning Protect Penn Trafford, is a citizens group working to ensure safety, security, and quality of life from the effects of unconventional gas development in the borough of Trafford, Penn Township, and surrounding communities, primarily in Westmoreland County. We knew early on that as an organization, the only way for us to have people get involved with our mission was to educate them. So our educational goals became to educate, engage, and empower. Protect Our Children Coalition is, I'm the outreach coordinator for the coalition, and it is a coalition of local and regional organizations dedicated to protecting school children from the health risks of shale gas drilling and infrastructure. Protect Our Children's goal is to limit children's exposure to harmful pollutants by keeping shale gas drilling and infrastructure away from schools. So if you go to the next slide. Protect PT is really what I'm going to talk about today, and our use of direct support funding. We began organizing with the guidance of Stephanie, who just spoke from Mountain Watershed Association, and when we learned that Apex Energy LLC had plans to develop an unconventional well pad in an agricultural and residential area of Penn Township, very close to the borders of neighboring communities. At first we were only a small number of community members, but we had closely followed the actions of the local government. And in April we incorporated as a state nonprofit, but that didn't mean that we were a federal nonprofit, a 501c3. So in August that year we filed our 501c3 paperwork, and as Stephanie mentioned, it took some time and resources in order for us to do that. We received status in November, and that was retroactive to the date we incorporated, which was really good. So we go to the next slide. So we submitted our first application for direct support funding in January to launch a campaign that would increase community awareness on the issue of unconventional gas development near densely populated areas of our community. This was our first action as a group, and we had never applied for funds before. We really didn't know where to start. So Stephanie helped us understand what we needed to do, include in our application and in our budget. The first direct support request was to hire speakers and conduct outreach for a special public meeting our township was having regarding the new oil and gas ordinance. We wanted to have an impact at this meeting and try to educate our local officials on the health concerns surrounding unconventional gas development. We were able to get a fiscal sponsor, and we learned the importance of having a fiscal sponsor as a new organization, but also that would affect the amount of funding we could get because they took a percentage of the funds we were asking for. We continued to ask for direct support because it was so easy to apply for, and it seemed like almost every month we were applying for money for some type of outreach or educational event. By doing so, we've learned the importance of preparation, making a solid budget, running an effective campaign, and understanding the total impact our events had on our mission. And what I mean by that is that we needed to make sure the money wasn't wasted. We needed to figure out what type of outreach worked and what didn't work for our area. We also had to figure out a way to do additional fundraising because direct support didn't pay for everything we needed. We had to pay for legal fees as a result of what was happening in our community, and we knew we couldn't do that with direct support funding. So we were restricted what we could actually do, but this actually helped us be a successful organization that we are today. Even though we are now a 501c3 and can apply for grants, a direct support fund allows us to apply for smaller amounts and offers a rapid response for unforeseen needs. So this picture in the slide is a really good example of one of our first newsletters we put out advertising this public meeting and trying to get people to come to the meeting. And so this was really all because of direct support. Can you go to the next slide? So just to give you an idea of some of the things we used the money for, we used direct support for speaker fees and honorariums, for outreach mailers, educational, training, and fundraising events. We also sent mailers to solicit for community donations. We were able to pay for booth and room rentals, refreshments at these meetings, and technology such as a projector and screen. And of course, our website subscription was one of the most important things we were able to do. And so pictured here is a great example of some of our fundraising event and a booth rental that we actually had. We were able to pay for the banner. We were able to pay for bags to sell some merchandise in order to make some money for donations. So if you go to the next slide. There were several challenges we identified along the way when it came to funding and direct support. Getting a fiscal sponsor was an early challenge because we had to try to coordinate with this third party, giving them some control over what we did and our accounting. Since they took a percentage of the money, which we didn't understand at first, we had to then incorporate that into our expenses and into our budget. So there was a little bit of a learning curve there. Even though we felt like the fiscal sponsor stood for a really good cause in itself, we didn't want to give away such a large percentage of the money. We also because of the mission and rules of the fiscal sponsor, we couldn't engage in litigation. So when it came time for us to do that, which was the next step in our campaign, we really hit a roadblock. Paying for legal fees was another challenge. And when we started organizing, we wanted to get an attorney for advice on wording publications. So we are always putting out accurate information, writing letters and commenting to our local government on the proposed ordinance, attending public hearings so that we could participate as an organization. And direct support wouldn't cover these attorney's fees. And we felt that these actions were some of the most important things that we needed to do in order to pressure our local government. We learned, though, that we could use direct support funds for things like outreach, education, and fundraising events. So we took the opportunity at these events to raise funds for legal component of our campaign. To echo what Stephanie talked about earlier regarding regulations and restrictions, when we finally did start fundraising and we wanted to use common fundraising practices in our community like raffle baskets, 50-50, and other small game of chance, we realized our state made sure that you were organized for a year before they would consider giving you a license. So that an additional challenge was planning these events, which took a lot of time. And so this is valuable time that we could work on our campaign, and it was tough to find time to do it all. One creative way we found to raise money was by participating in a local farmers market, which is pictured right here. We had a member actually donate organic garden plants that she had raised from seed and gave them to us to sell. We went to the farmer's market, which was free to attend, and we sold the plants. We also coordinated with Stephanie from Mountain Watershed Association to come and do water sampling for people, and we wanted to bring, so people could bring their well water to the market. While she was there, we handed out educational literature for both organizations, so it was really a win-win. We didn't raise very much money, but other than the sign, which we had already bought with other funds from direct support, it didn't cost us any money. So we decided no matter what we did, we had to continue to raise money in order to survive as an organization. Each of our board members had to contribute funds or pay for legal bills each month, and if that's what we had to do, we would do it. Even if we had to do a fundraiser every month, we felt our mission was that important. So if you go to the next slide. So without direct support funding, our organization really would not exist. This funding gave us most of the tools we needed to move forward to protect our community and our children. Even as a 501c3, direct support funding allows us to apply for smaller amounts and offers rapid response for unforeseen needs. And Mountain Watershed Association has was a valuable partner in many ways, providing not only monetary resources, but also other resources. So we go to the next slide. So if anybody on this webinar would like more information on Protect PT or Protect Our Children Coalition, you can find us on the web, Facebook, or Twitter, and you could also email me.
Thank you, Jillian, so much. Next we have Ron Slave. Ron is a retired Pittsburgh public school teacher, and he is going to talk a little bit about his community and the work he's been doing there.
Thank you, Parthena. For some 5 years, our group has been educating the public on the risk of Marcellus unconventional drilling in Upper Borough and surrounding townships and boroughs, especially Allegheny Township, through informational meetings, Gasland film showings, attendance at township, borough, and school district meetings, letters to the editor, and aiding Willowbrook residents in fighting CNX, Council Energy's plans to drill unconventional gas wells. Doing all this through information dissemination and raising funds for legal representation and legal initiatives. One of the first uses for direct support funding was when we had a problem in Allegheny Township in Westmoreland County where CNX was constructing a Marcellus gas well approximately 700 feet from residential homes on Willowbrook Road. 3 families took legal action to stop the drilling and sought broader public support for their cause. Many township residents had little or no knowledge of what was happening or about to happen in their township. Residents were unaware of the township's oil and gas ordinance, which allows drilling in all zoned areas of the township, including residentially zoned neighborhoods. If we go, can we look at the next slide, please? You will see the type of construction going on when the site was being constructed, built. And as you can see, it's a very large area. It leaves certainly a large footprint. And this is some 700 feet from the homes of the residents there on Willowbrook Road. And besides the large area, and that's certainly, if you compare this type of a footprint as compared to the conventional wells we're all accustomed to seeing, it's such a much larger footprint and damage to the environment than we would find with conventional wells. And if you look at the next slide, you will see it is a form of deforestation as well. Tremendous amount of trees were cut down to construct this site. And what is also alarming is that the person who owns this property where the construction site is taking place, the well pad, has some 350 acres, and yet they decided to put this well pad 700 feet from the Willowbrook homes. So to deal with this problem, the Willowbrook Road residents wanted not only to prevent the drilling, but also to educate the citizenry about the dangers of fracking and unconventional drilling, and to make them aware of their township's ordinance, which mirrors the infamous Act 13, struck down as unconstitutional by the Pennsylvania Supreme Court. Act 13 stripped local communities of the right to control drilling and allowed gas drilling anywhere in Pennsylvania, even in residential areas. So the Willowbrook protesters wanted to urge their fellow citizens to attend the appeal hearing before the Allegheny Township Zoning Hearing Board, where they would learn how placing an industrial process like Marcellus drilling in an RA zone area was an incompatible land use, and instead belongs in an industrial zone. The hearing was to be used to enlighten the citizens of all the dangers of Marcellus drilling facing them and how they could help to stop it. And if we look at this particular slide, we see that in rural areas in particular, it is a disaster for many people. As the headline says in that picture, rural Pennsylvanians say, fracking just ruined everything. As you can see, this couple near their home, you see, I believe that's a water buffalo to the side. And it brings to mind the problem I have seen in Butler County, in an area called the Woodlands in Conquenessing Borough, where the people have not had water there, drinkable water, for several years now. And they have tried to turn to the county, the state, and just have gotten nowhere. They've been supplied mostly by donations, people donating money so they can buy bottled water, and this has been one of the projects of one of the churches in the area. So it is a real problem for rural residents, and I think especially these people have been very hit hard by the type of unconventional drilling taking place there. So the project, using direct support funding, was a major outreach effort to educate the public and garner support for the Willowbrook residents fighting this incursion into their privacy and way of life. The aim was to make residents understand this type of drilling and as an industrial activity that could happen in their neighborhoods. Hopefully, the citizens would understand that the Willowbrook residents' fight was also their fight, and certainly could impact socially and economically their lives for many years to come. Finally, the project utilized a newer program from the United States Postal Service called Every Door Direct Mail, and reached some 2,350 residents in Allegheny Township. The program was an economical means of reaching a greater number of people at approximately 17.5 cents per household. Of course, the cost of printing was an additional cost. So we look here at this particular flyer. This is what we sent out. This is the front side of the flyer. And we wanted to emphasize to people getting this what was probably going to happen in their backyards if they did not become aware of the dangers. We showed a picture here of flaring, the well derrick, the fracking process, the frack pit, and we asked this question: do you want this in your backyard or front yard for that matter? And on the back side of this, we can go to the next slide, we basically told the people why they were receiving this letter, certainly about the hearing we wanted them to attend, but to educate them about everything we could anyway in a short amount of space about what unconventional drilling was about, the nuisances that would occur, the water contamination, the air pollution and health effects, the explosions that could happen, the depreciation of their property value, and the lack of adequate setbacks. All these types of things were put into the flyer that was sent out. Again, a major effort at information dissemination. Well, if we look at some of the outcomes, it's not surprising. When local officials are working hand in glove with the gas industry, the outcomes are rather predictable. We had a hearing. We lost in that hearing. We appealed it to Common Pleas Court. We lost that bout. The judge there saw basically no difference between unconventional and conventional drilling, which was ridiculous, but quite frankly, a lot of people who sign leases don't see the difference or aren't aware of the difference between unconventional and conventional drilling, and they certainly are two different animals. So the next step was to appeal to Commonwealth Court, and that is what we are doing and Willowbrook residents are doing right now. No date has yet been set for that hearing, but we believe that to win these battles and eventually the war, our case and others will have to go all the way to the Pennsylvania Supreme Court, where we believe those justices will be more sympathetic to our cause. Just last year, for example, we had 3 new judges elected to the Supreme Court of Pennsylvania. They are progressive judges, and we know that they will join the 2 other progressive judges that were part of the Robinson Township case. So we're hoping for the very best there. And there are certainly several cases coming before that Supreme Court now. So the fight continues. Currently, with new rules guiding DSF funding, we are using DSF funds to support the legal costs of taking this fight to the courts. In the past, we have helped in providing informational dissemination, but are now using DSF funds to aid in legal expenses incurred through transcript and filing fees, as well as transcript binding, although direct payments for attorney fees are not covered. We have also helped the Willowbrook families raise funds to aid in legal expenses through a GoFundMe drive and private donations. As you can see from this slide, the type of picture we put on the page for the Willowbrook funding appeal. And you can see, of course, in that picture, the well pad. It was right in back of the home. That's just a shed next to the home. But quite frankly, I think it's probably even less than 500 feet from the person's home. You can see too that how people donated for this, and we've put on this page all the information about the particular fund drive and what was happening with the Willowbrook residents. So, in addition, we are interested in having Upper Borough's oil and gas ordinance reviewed by a legal expert in the field, and then further consult with an attorney on the proper legal strategies to help head off drilling plans in Upper Borough. A legal letter to our supervisors explaining deficiencies in our current ordinance could possibly move them either to consider strengthening our current ordinance or allow us then to file a substantive validity challenge to that ordinance. While we are focusing on legal battles and its costs for this cycle of DSF grant funding, we also are continuing the strategy of direct mailing in Upper Borough to educate the public. So in reflecting on all this, let me say that direct support funding provided us with the funds needed to provide information to local residents by printing flyers and then mailing them to residents. Such informational dissemination allows us to educate and inform the residents about unconventional drilling and its ill effects. These mailings are allowed or have allowed us to collect donations from those residents who were also concerned about the drilling. Without direct support funding, this could not have been accomplished unless those of us involved had borrowed the necessary funds or dug into our own savings. Direct support funding is a program that certainly can help those in our state and others to accomplish the types of strategies we have used in fighting the gas industry. As stated previously, the U.S. Postal Service, in its program called Every Door Direct Mail, is a very economical way of getting a message out to the citizenry, and one that I highly recommend. Moreover, recent changes allowing for certain legal costs by DSF have and will be a great help to those involved in litigation. Transcript and binding costs for court cases add up quickly, and DSF really helps in this regard. So we at UB Camp and the Willowbrook families are very grateful for direct support funding, and urge others to apply for these grants in your fight against the gas industry.
Thank you, Ron, so much for that. Next, we have Casey Pegg with Shale Field Organizing Committee.
Thank you so much, Prarthana. This is Casey. I am a volunteer community organizer with the Shale Field Organizing Committee, and we are a grassroots group based in central and northeast Pennsylvania, organizing for healthy communities and ecosystems on the front lines of fracking since 2013. So here are some of the projects that we've gotten direct support funding for. The very first project that the Shale Field Organizing Committee, or SOC, did was the Sullivan County Listening Project. And we drove north into Sullivan County, heavily fracked Sullivan County, and just interviewed a bunch of people. We asked them questions about their experience with the gas industry and their vision for the community. And this really helped us to frame the work that we would do and are doing around the gas industry. And this is an ongoing project. We kind of put it aside for the moment because while we were in the middle of this high-pressure pipeline, the Atlantic Sunrise, was proposed to come, just a few miles from our base. So we immediately started going out and organizing around that issue. We funded a number of things for the pipeline campaign through the Direct Support Fund. Mailer. The mailer is really all about this expression, the hazard zone, the idea that there's a certain distance away from the pipeline where you will have, if you're within that distance, you will have no chance of survival. And that really helped develop a common language in the community, so that was incredibly helpful. And the 5K was really cool. It pulled in a lot of people who were outside, the people who were normally coming to our events, and we had a Beyond Extreme Energy there with that. You can see their poster there in the upper picture. And 5Ks are actually really complicated and expensive to organize, so we wouldn't have been able to do it without direct support funding. I also thought I would mention Shale Field Justice Spring Break. It wasn't an official SOC project, but a number of people who work and have worked with SOC were involved. And that was a really cool convergence that we brought organizers, community members, community leaders, and students from around, from Pennsylvania and from neighboring states together for a week-long retreat to learn about environmental justice. It was huge. But the Direct Support Fund means more to us than a way to get cash. So I really wanted to make sure that I gave some context for why the Direct Support Fund is so important. But before I do that, I just want to make a disclaimer that I'm not an expert. I'm just a kid off the block trying to figure things out. I haven't been organizing on the front lines for that long, and there are lots of people who know better than me, but I just picked out a few things that I thought should be said. So perhaps the major thing that I want folks to take away from this is that real change comes from the front lines. Frontlines communities are the people that are best equipped with the knowledge and skills to find a way forward. And this is primarily because they know their communities. And frontlines organizing can be intersectional. And what I mean in this context is that if you're talking to somebody about fracking, they may be experiencing effects from that, but they also may be experiencing effects from poverty or addiction or racism. And as somebody in that community who's working with people in that community and wants to build long-term relationships, you can't engage with them except in a multi-issue sort of framework. So basically just like treating them like human beings and like whole human beings. And frontlines communities are organized, and organizers are often willing to take bold actions because their backs are to the wall in a way that people who aren't frontlines, well, their backs are to the wall, let's say that. And at the same time, frontlines organizing can precipitate long-term cultural shifts because of cultivating these long-term relationships. We're not simply trying to, okay, well, we fix this one short-term problem. We're in this area to stay, and we want to keep building on our work and actually change the culture in a way that makes people less dependent on the gas industry and permits for healthier communities and healthy ecosystems, which is, incredibly challenging. And Frontlines organizers and communities are used to operating on a shoestring, as I'm sure the other participants on this call will corroborate. So we can do a lot with very few resources. $200 may not seem like a lot to a funder or somebody from a large organization, but it really goes a long way in terms of what we can do with it. But that comes with the caveat that the change that we can make with that money may not be easily packaged into outcomes in terms of a grant application, and that's one of the challenges for finding funding. So challenges for finding funding. So the first one I'm going to talk about is the accessibility of the foundation model. People who may be perfectly able to administer funding very effectively, they may not know what funding is available. They may not know how to go about finding that out. They may not have the language that funders are used to hearing in a grant proposal. And some people may not even have access to internet or things that some people take for granted. So this is why the Direct Support Fund is so cool. They're just really accessible to us. They are responsive, they're transparent, and they're also experienced with Frontlines organizing. Many of them are Frontlines organizers themselves, so they share common goals. They recognize that we're human, so if we make a mistake on something, they're not going to they're not going to just write us off because they know us and they're our friends. And on the other side of the coin, they're versed in the language and culture of funders, so they're capable of bridging that gap that can exist between Frontlines communities and organizers and funders. Oh, I just wanted to, before I go to that slide, I just wanted to emphasize that the Direct Support Fund is really, it's a support network in addition to a way to get funding. And in fact, the Mountain Watershed Association hosted the Shale Field Organizing Committee for a whole day. They took a day out of their busy lives to talk to us about finding funding, which was really, really helpful. Oh, and they wrote a letter of recommendation to us, for the a grant from the Ben and Jerry's Foundation, which we ended up getting, so that was really helpful. All right, so now I'll tell you why sexy is on the screen. So this, who here has heard of oh, this issue is sexy right now, like gas is sexy right now? Like this is just a horrible way of referring to environmental justice issues, not only because it's disrespectful, but also because grassroots groups and campaigns must compete for resources based on the marketability of their issue, as well as their ability to network and navigate the application process. A democratic process based on moral imperatives and material realities should be used when determining the flow of resources. Frontlines communities should not have to market themselves. And this is a really excellent resource that treats this issue. I highly, highly recommend reading The Revolution Will Not Be Funded. So the next challenge I want to talk about is the conservation versus the environmental justice paradigm. So here are some bullet points. I'm not going to go through all of them, but what I wanted to bring out with this slide is that there's conservation and then there's environmental justice. And conservation sort of operates largely within the established system, and it seeks to sort of slow and limit ecological destruction. It doesn't really pose a challenge to so-called economic progress, whereas environmental justice is more about self-preservation, and it does pose a challenge to those power structures because of the depths it goes to in addressing the root causes. And as a result, conservation is very highly funded, whereas environmental justice struggles are massively underfunded. And this is a book called Varieties of Environmentalism that treats that. And you know, the situation is so dire that we really need to put the money where it's going to do the work. And to me, that means putting it into environmental justice struggles. Okay, so another challenge is gaps within the environmental justice movement, namely between top-down versus bottom-up theories of change. So the top-down, commonly referred to as like big greens, like these larger national organizations that work closely with the establishment, they have much more resources than grassroots groups typically do on the whole. And there are also a lot of instances of larger nonprofits coming into Frontlines communities with their own agenda and not lifting up local leadership, and that's a problem that needs to be addressed. So there's the resource inequity, there's the leadership inequity, there's also divisions around class and race, and the distinct cultures of practice, I think, is a very useful way of putting that. And I just want to mention that these points were given to me by Ananda Tan, who works with a group called the B Initiative, Building Equity and Accountability, and they are a really cool group that has tried to sort of mediate between larger nonprofits, funders, and grassroots groups, and I have them linked in my resource section. So let's talk about next steps. In terms of accessibility, funders making themselves available, so taking the first steps, not necessarily waiting for grassroots groups to approach you. And a group that I think is really good, a foundation that's really excellent at that is the Sparkplug Foundation. Their website is so easy to navigate, and it's really like geared toward people who don't necessarily have a lot of experience with grant writing, so I want to give them props for that. And I also really want to give a shout out to Ben and Jerry's, because they are like really funding grassroots efforts, and that's really amazing to see. And so there's more organizations able to, we need more organizations to advocate for the Frontlines to funders, like Mountain Watershed Association is doing. And we also need to demarketize the resource distribution. I feel like that requires more unpacking than I have time for here, but I just wanted to mention it. And also explore member-based sources of funding. I understand that Halt the Harm is going forward with a crowdfunding training, and I think that is an excellent idea. Like, that is something that we need to explore as grassroots Frontlines organizers. So funding the environmental justice paradigm, lobbying and education to funders about the type of work that brings about real change, and people working for conservation organizations willing to take risks to support more radical work. And I've had really good experience with a lot of people working for larger nonprofits who are like in there, like inside the nonprofits, but they have our backs. They're like fighting for the grassroots in there. And finally, in the environmental justice movement, we need spaces to facilitate some real talk about power and privilege within the movement. We need lobbying and education of big greens about Frontlines work and how to engage respectfully and constructively with those doing that work. And we need to create shared analysis and principles. And a really good example of those is the Jimenez principles, which were created in 1996, and I have those linked in my resource section. And I guess what it all comes down to is building relationships outside of the comfort zone. So here's my contact info and links to some of the things that I mentioned. Please check it out. And thank you very much.
Thank you, Casey. Thanks for rounding out our presentations today. So now we'll have a little bit of Q&A with either of the panelists or all of the panelists. Again, if you have any questions, feel free to share at the bottom right hand of your screen in case you want to chat it to us. You can also email it to us at info@halttheharm. One question we do have here is someone's asking about direct support funding, and they're asking, how do we apply for direct support funding? So I think that question is for Stephanie.
Thanks, Parthena. That's an excellent question. So direct support, if you can go back to the slide for me in my presentation, it's I think the last slide on mine. It's got our link to our website, mtwatershed.com, and under the section Learn More, you'll be able to find a whole page on direct support. All of the application materials are available online, and so we do consider proposals monthly. The deadlines for those every month are the 3rd Friday of the month. Those are due. And then the Direct Support Committee considers those on the 4th Friday of the month. So we generally can turn that around pretty quick. And if you've got a time-sensitive issue, applications are simply emailed to me. So you fill out the form that's available on our website there and just email that to me. And all the instructions and a sample application are also available online.
Thanks, Stephanie. So really quick, while I have your all attention, I think I'm going to go back to, I know Casey mentioned crowdfunding. And I wanted to, because I got cut off earlier, just talk a little bit about Halt the Harm and crowdfunding, and it's actually one of the services that we are presenting for folks who are interested. Really quick, for those who don't know, Halt the Harm is an emerging advocacy network, and we're really designed to connect, serve, and support the dedicated individuals like the panelists on this call and folks like yourself working to halt the harms caused by fracking. And our goal is really to expand and strengthen the base of leaders and supporters in the movement and facilitate collaboration by developing services such as this webinar to equip leaders with the tools and strategies they need to halt the harms of fracking, whether it's in their local communities or ultimately to win the fight nationally. So the leaders of Halt the Harm are really all across the board. We've got leaders who are concerned parents organizing with other parents at their school against local drilling, all the way to folks who are perhaps career organizers working for larger groups. And here are just a list of free resources and services online that we have. For example, here I've got a screenshot of our leader directory where you could email others directly or follow them on social media, things like campaign strategy and support, webinars, again like this one, and event support, just to name a few. These are just some of the things that we're working on this year, but we're always looking for ideas and suggestions from individuals such as yourself. And some of you listening today may already be leaders, but if you're not one yet, you are in luck. So look out for an email from me in the next week or so giving you access to these resources online, and I'm happy to work with anyone directly through email or talk to you on the phone to help you out and to ask, to answer any questions that you might have. So again, one of the newest services that we have that Casey was mentioning is crowdfunding. Now, I'm sure everyone's heard about crowdfunding before, whether it's through Indiegogo or a GoFundMe page like Ron was mentioning. And crowdfunding is really just an alternate fundraising path for groups that might not be able to tap in to a small number of wealthy benefactors or a large foundational grant. I think I'd like to say it's often considered more quote-unquote democratic because you have more people contributing small amounts of money to a cause as opposed to depending on a few wealthier individuals, which is not always very sustainable. And it also, it creates a sense of collective ownership and pride in the work you're doing because you have many people who are contributing financially. And it can also help build meaningful engagement with bigger audiences. And once they've given money, they feel, a sense of investment in your work, and they can be tapped into again and again on other projects or campaigns. But it is important to keep in mind that crowdfunding works best for specific tangible projects that have a clear cause and effect. For example, a event that's coming up, or if you're looking for transportation to transport your community members to a march, as opposed to just looking for general operating financial funds. And, it does take time, effort, and a solid base of existing donors. So these are just a few things to think of and take into consideration when seeing if crowdfunding is for you. And as one of the services that Halt the Harm provides for its leaders, I'm happy to help folks think through a strategy and plan and provide recommendations on what may work best for you. So you can email me And if this is something that you've been thinking of or something that you've already started and you're looking for guidance on how to advance further. So if we don't have any other questions, I guess this is the last call. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining in and bearing with us with our technical difficulties. But I'm so happy that we had our 4 panelists give really great presentations on very different things, but also very related. So just remember, a brief feedback survey is coming your way. I think there is a question. So there's a last minute question right before we jump off. Are there any other DSFs, or direct support funds, across the country? And what of those, what about us in other regions? What do we do? So I think this question, Stephanie, would you like to answer this question?
Sure, and take a stab at it. So for direct support, we will consider applications. It's not just within Pennsylvania, it's throughout the Marcellus Shale region. So if you're within that shale region, you're welcome to apply regardless of your state, the state that you're in. In terms of there being other similar projects to direct support, like I mentioned a couple, I know Sierra Club has pipeline grants, the Center for Health, Environment, and Justice has their small grants program, and then I know, I believe that Clean Air Council has something similar for groups that they're working with closely. My recommendation, if you don't know of a project like this in your area, is to talk to some of the more regional groups, like Mountain Watershed, for example. We would consider ourselves a regional organization. So maybe groups that have been established and basically have experience with grant writing and relations with foundations, because I think what we would like to see happen more is have direct support be a model for other organizations to try to disperse some of those grant funds. In conversation with our funders, we definitely have heard that there is a desire to fund grassroots. It's just there is that gap between groups that are not really formally organized and foundations who have those requirements, like being a 501c3 or finding a fiscal sponsor. So my recommendation is that if there isn't a project in your area, to reach out to one of those regional groups and let them know that this is something that's being done elsewhere, and that you would appreciate any help on the grassroots in your area. And if you've got a group who's interested in doing that, I would love to chat with them and talk about how direct support can serve as a model for that.
Thanks, Stephanie. And Beverly, that was Beverly Sweeney. Just to add on to that answer, I think Halt the Harm is definitely interested in helping Mountain Watershed, spread the message of their model. And so if there are, like Stephanie mentioned, if there are any regional groups that you know of that are in your area, whichever state that you live in, I'm more than happy to chat with you offline after this webinar, and shoot me an email, and we can talk about ways of approaching regional groups on some type of proposal, or sharing with them how direct support fund works and replicating that model elsewhere. Great, so I don't think we have any more questions, but really quickly, there's going to be a brief feedback survey that's coming your way once you exit this webinar. And if you have suggestions for the next webinar, either include them in the survey in the comments section, or you can send this to us at info@halttheharm.net. And again, if you're curious about what else is going on with us at Halt the Harm or with Stop the Frack Attack, you can check us out at our respective websites. So thank you so much for taking the time out this evening to listen in, and have a good night, everyone.